Hi guys, and welcome back to another video. I hope you guys are doing well and I hope you guys are all staying safe during this time. So today I'm back with another video and I wanted to talk about some of the boundaries that I think are absolutely essential to establish when approaching Christian dating. And so sit back, relax, and I hope that you guys enjoy this video. Now, our culture is inundated with dating. It's borderline an obsession. It's everywhere you go. It's difficult to escape from it. You know, you can sit on the train, look up, and there are 3 adverts on the latest dating sites to join. You go to work and it's the topic of conversation. You need to look no further than the canteen to hear about who's seeing who, who's met with who, who's even sleeping with who. It's one of those things that we're just taught that if we're single and we've reached that age, that we're just supposed to do. And so often it's something that we begin to explore without proper guidance. And so I hope that this video will be useful to some of you out there as you navigate the dating phases and this dating period of your life. Now, I thought I would just start off by bringing a bit of clarity to some of the definitions or some of the terminology we frequently hear. Now, there's a difference between dating and dating. So if you're dating, that means that you are actively getting yourself out there and beginning to meet people. You know, you might have had the time to think that, yeah, do you know what, I would like to get married one day. And now you're making yourself available to see if there's potentially somebody who you find some sort of connection with that you would be interested in exploring further in the future. Or for some, you know, it's a great way to discover what they like, what they don't like, what they think, the qualities that they think would be great for them to find in their future spouse. And dating is very casual, you know, maybe just a coffee meetup here and there, really just getting to know people. That means that you are on the dating scene. Now, if you're dating somebody, that implies that there's a bit more exclusivity involved, in that now you've been seeing each other consistently on a regular basis. At this point, you're boyfriend and girlfriend, and you've probably made your intentions quite known at this point. You're enjoying getting to know this person, you're feeling the vibes, you're like, yes, this person is somebody who I think could be a lot more in the future, and we're interested in seeing where this goes. And then there's courting. Now, if you're courting, this means that, hey, you've been boyfriend and girlfriend, you've been dating for a period of time or for a long enough period of time, and that you two have come to the conclusion that, hey, you would like to get married one day, that this is heading in the direction of marriage. You may not have the ring on your finger yet, but you've let your accountabilities know, and you are actively pursuing and working towards marriage as the end goal. Now, as Christians, we're often taught that we shouldn't date as the world dates. So what does that actually mean? And so I just want to highlight one of the main differences between modern or cultural dating and Christian dating. So modern dating is basically the introduction of 2 people who are interested in exploring a premarital relationship that may or may not lead to marriage. And I think that's important to note, that when you are approaching modern dating, it doesn't always have to lead to marriage. And you know, that's really something that's dependent on the individual and their own individual desires. For some, for many, it's just recreational. For some, it's just because of something they want to do to fill their time. And for some people use it to fulfill their emotional and sexual needs. So it really does depend on the individuals and what they decide within that relationship. Whereas Christian dating is a lot more intentional in its process. So Christian dating is basically the introduction of 2 people, male and female, who are looking to explore a premarital relationship with marriage being the end goal. And I think that's also important to note, that anybody approaching Christian dating should have marriage as the end goal. There is a purpose to the pursuit of a relationship, which is to find a committed life partner. I think it's also important to note that the process is different as well, in that as Christians, it's important to bring people along on the journey and to remain accountable through this process. And so that might be your really good confidants or close friends or family if possible, or your spiritual leaders, but those who you can be accountable to. Because ultimately, marriage is not a decision that should be taken lightly. It's one of the most important decisions you will ever make in your life, and nobody wants to spend the rest of their life with somebody that they end up being miserable with. You want a fulfilling marriage, and that's why having accountabilities is so important, because I can tell you that during my dating and courtship phase, there were times where I reacted to certain things very, very negatively, and it takes an objective person to sometimes be like, hey Nick, do you know what, that was a bit out of line how you responded, and really it does reveal areas here and here that you still need to go and work on. So girl, you better take that and surrender that to God so that you can deal with those things. But it's always good to have voices, wise counsel involved. So what is a boundary? Now, a boundary is basically a line that marks the limit or the edge of something. Now, for example, outside of my house, I've got a huge hedge that separates my driveway from the pavement. That is a boundary. It's a line that demarcates or separates one thing from another thing. Boundaries really determine what you will accept of another person's actions or conduct or speech or behavior. Now, trust me, I know that this dating phase can sometimes be a bit of an ambiguous phase to walk through, because at this point you're not quite friends, but neither are you married. And now you have to learn to deal with the intricacies of growing in relationship, of growing your emotions together, of getting to know each other, of determining and understanding how much romance is actually appropriate to engage in without the full level of commitment. I see it so often where people have been boyfriend and girlfriend for a long time, or courting or whatever for an extended period of time, and they end up feeling a bit settled in the relationship and feel that it's okay to give more of themselves emotionally without that level of commitment. You see women all the time submitting and acting like a wife before you actually walk down the aisle. There are certain levels of emotional intimacy that the person that you're with doesn't get to enjoy until it's in the fullness of marriage. And this is one of the reasons boundaries are so essential. So the first boundary I'm really going to touch on today is boundaries around emotional intimacy. Now, the Bible speaks about how we should guard our hearts with all diligence, for out of it flows the issues of life. Now, the heart in itself is such a powerful design. Gosh, it's strong, it's resilient, but at the same time, it's also delicate and it's sensitive. Now, there are some of you out there that I know have experienced certain traumas and pains and just disappointments. Maybe you were betrayed by somebody, but you know what? You were able to deal with it. You were able to get over it, and you were actually able to get yourself back into that place. But then something else happens and your heart just feels stretched. And this is what can happen over time. Things happen and our hearts begin to feel so stretched that it begins to lose its elasticity. It begins to lose its bounce back ability. And trust me, I've been there where I felt like my heart has been so stretched due to heartbreak and disappointment that I didn't know how I was going to bounce back. And that's why it's so important to guard our hearts, because we want our hearts to operate at its maximum capacity, even in relationships. Now, let me just say this. If you are at that early stage of dating, you should not be divulging so much information about yourself to this person. I heard a phrase once that just so described what I was thinking, and that was emotional promiscuity. Now, when I heard this, I was like, yes, because it describes so much of what I was thinking. Emotional promiscuity is basically where you divulge so much information about yourself too soon. Your history, your past, your pains, your hurts, your pleasures, your displeasures, your likes, your dreams, your future plans, the areas that God is dealing with you in your life. And this could all be on the second date. People who end up being emotionally promiscuous give so much of themselves away to people who, number one, don't deserve to know that much about them, and number two, when we don't realize that connecting with people on this depth or on this level has consequences on our hearts in the long run, and can ultimately be very damaging if not approached and handled properly. I'm trying to protect your hearts out here, and in order to do that, you have to place a guard around how much of yourself you decide to pour out in conversation. Now, when you fall into this place of emotional promiscuity, it becomes difficult to actually see clearly, because now you become emotionally entangled. And when you become emotionally entangled, you can no longer decipher what's your voice, what's God's voice, and is the enemy even speaking into this situation? And your actions become so impulsive, and you begin to make decisions based off of your emotions. But how many of you know out there that your emotions can lie to you? Your emotions will be tricking you one day and telling you sweet nothings the next day. Your emotions will be telling you that the sky is green and the grass is blue and that what's wrong is right and it feels good, so it must be okay. But that's not always the case, because the truth is the human heart is wicked and divisive, and we will create things to get what we want in that moment. And this is why it's so important to have that boundary regarding how much of yourself you decide to share in dating, because I want you to be able to see things clearly. I don't want you to get confused because you just got swept off your feet in the moment. And I feel like Christians deal with this badly, because let me just say, this one where Christians always be doing, God said you're my husband and wife, and then as a result they feel so confident that they jump into a place and have no guards around growing in an emotionally healthy way with this person. And when we do that, we assume a place of intimacy that has not yet been developed. So we haven't gone through the process of relationship, but because we see the end goal, or we feel like we've seen the end goal, we're so impulsive on how quickly we decide to engage with each other emotionally, and so we do overshare so soon. We do connect on those levels so soon. But let me tell you, when you are in that early phase, we need clarity. And that means reeling it back in for a second, so we can just stand on the edge and make the decisions soberly. You know you've breached an emotional boundary when, for example, you've shared something or you've overshared something and you end up feeling wounded by it because it wasn't received with the gravity that you intended it to be received with. And now you feel vulnerable. You might even feel a bit stupid, like, why did I even end up saying that in the first place? And if that happens, that person was never worthy of receiving it in the first place. Because the truth is, our emotions are precious. You are precious. And you want to know that the person that you decide to spend the rest of your life with will know and understand how to handle you. Then I want to say, when establishing emotional boundaries, intentionality always brings clarity. I find that when people are dating or they've got close friendships with somebody of the opposite sex, sometimes it's easy for the lines to get blurred and you don't quite know what is going on in the situation. You've been speaking for a period of time, you're beginning to invest yourself emotionally, you're beginning to like the person, but they haven't quite shown you the direction for the next phase. I see often men and women, you probably know them, hey, they're probably in your church. Do you know what? They're probably you watching and listening to this video right now, who's got that male or female best friend, and you guys are so close, you know, everybody knows you're close. You'll be up on the phone talking and sharing what God is doing in your life and all of this stuff, and really engaging in deep conversation. And then down the line, although you're friends, one of you, usually the woman, starts getting some feelings. And where those lines may begin to blur, where you're starting to get emotionally invested, you need to actually begin to ask the question, what's going on? What are we doing? What is this? What is this? And that's such a relevant question, because until a man has made his intentions absolutely clear, there is a certain level of emotional intimacy he doesn't get to enjoy from you whilst you're just dating or whilst you're just friends. You have to give the level of intimacy that's appropriate for the phase of dating that you're at. And what I mean by this is that if you're finding that your level of emotional intimacy is increasing, but the level of commitment is not increasing, then we have a problem. You want the person who you're dating to, number one, be able to lay his heart bare, to express his intentions and his motives behind what he's doing, so that you know that you're not just speaking to someone for endless sake, for speaking sake, but actually this is actually progressive and it's going somewhere. If he can't express his intentions to you, you don't know how to appropriately align yourself. You want to know that the person that you're dating is confident enough to pursue you. When I tell you my husband pursued me, as in he pursued. Even when I rejected, he pursued, he prayed, and he pursued. You want to know that he's confident enough to pursue you, because you are worth the pursuit. You are worth being pursued. But you also want to know that if you're dating somebody, that there's actually evidence, especially if you've been dating for a period of time, that there's actually evidence that this is heading in the direction of marriage, especially if you've been committing yourself emotionally. If intentionality isn't expressed, there can be no real clarity when it comes to this relationship. And ultimately, you end up opening yourself up to the possibility of heartbreak, which can be avoided as best as possible. Another area I think it's important to guard around emotional intimacy is your conversations. Now, there are just certain conversations I don't believe are appropriate to be engaging with when you are dating. I mean, one of those areas, just to give an example, I think often, and I hear this often and I see it often, and I've even done it myself, is when you're dating somebody or you've been boyfriend and girlfriend with them for a period of time and you're exploring this relationship more, often it comes up, this conversation about sexual past and sexual partners and sexual engagement. Now, I understand that whilst we're dating, listen, sex before marriage is a no-go zone. And so at some point you do have to approach the conversation of how you're managing, but there's a way we can approach the conversation of sex without delving into the dark side and delving into the other person's history and past encounters. Because I know in my life, when I did that, somebody say can of worms was opened. The can of worms was opened, because you want to know what now? Now I had reference points of something you told me, thinking that you could trust me with your level of emotion that I wasn't even ready to handle. Because to be honest, now I'm jealous of that girl because they've got a place in your heart that I don't have. And now I'm treating you differently because, to be honest, what do I do with the information? Now I found it out and I feel hurt by it. Can we be honest? How many of you have wanted to know something and then you realize, actually, maybe it's best that I didn't know that right now? Because I know my husband had loved hard before me, it built in me a narrative that just wasn't true about his sexual experiences. It was a mess. Can somebody say messy? Can somebody just say it was a mess? You can approach conversations about sex and the appropriate boundary we're going to place without needing to dig into the history banks, because it's just not necessary. But that just goes to show that even in my husband trusting me with that area, I wasn't ready to handle it. And that was more damaging in the long run. There are some things that I still needed to do in myself. Your oversharing can equally be damaging to the other person. Another area of conversation that we had to guard, especially like when we were dating, was conversations about our future, about what marriage would be like together and what our children would look like together and all things like that. Because when you begin to engage in those kind of conversations when you're dating and invest your emotions in that place, you begin to create a fantasy of a life that just really isn't true. And God forbid something was to break down, you would just be left with the memories of this life that you had created that just was never real. And that makes it that much harder to overcome the heartbreak. Because sometimes the power of the imagination, the power of the prospect of the future, it can be what's harder to get over than the heartbreak itself. The would've, the could've, it could have been like this. One of the things I practically do, that you can practically do to put a guard around conversation, is ask yourself, if my future husband was in this room, listening to my conversation, listening to the depth of conversation, would it be appropriate? How would I feel? Would I feel embarrassed? Would I feel like, oh, nobody was meant to hear that? Or would I have a clean conscience that says, hey, do you know what? How we're engaging in conversation is absolutely fine. And even if Jesus himself was in the room, I would say, pull up a seat. Let's talk about this together, because I feel no way about it. Finally, I want to say this around emotional intimacy. I want to say that so often, and this is something that I'm so passionate about, Lord help me, I see so often men and women who become very, very close. They are best friends. They're best friends. They be talking on the night, all hours of the morning. They don't call it pillow talk because they're best friends, so it doesn't fall into that category. But you know, you see this person and you love their qualities. And this is applicable to men and women. You love all their qualities. You think they'll be great wifey or husband material. You think they'll be the kind of person that will raise your kids well or raise children well, but you're just not attracted to them. And so therefore you keep them close enough but far enough, friend zone enough but far enough. In fact, you even family zone them, and this is my brother and this is my sister, but you still engage in a depth of intimacy that you shouldn't be engaging in. And I say this because we cannot use each other to fulfill our lack of emotional intimacy whilst we're dating until our husbands and our wives come along. No, we can't do it. Men and women need to stop it because we both do it equally. Men, you cannot enjoy the emotional benefits of a woman who you're not willing to commit to, because really what you're saying is that you're great, you're a great woman, you're even wifey material, but you're just not my wife. And women, we need to stop opening ourselves up to men who are not showing us that they're ready or even willing to commit and becoming emotionally invested. And likewise, women, you need to stop enjoying the emotional convenience and benefits of this good guy. He's a good guy, but because you're not attracted to him, you don't want to make it more. Stop using him to fulfill your lack of emotional intimacy until your husband comes along, because ultimately it's usury. And we want to ensure that we are developing healthy friendships and healthy relationships, and it's not fair on each other. Listen, if we are friends, like we're saying we're friends, I don't need to be on the phone to you till 3 a.m. in the morning. What are we talking about? What are we talking about that can't wait? Good night, I'll speak to you tomorrow. Yes, view each other as brother and sister, and this is important because it helps to keep purity in mind, because there are certain things you wouldn't want to say to hurt your brother or your sister. There are certain things you wouldn't want to do to violate or hurt your brother or your sister. And there are certain ways you wouldn't want to act that are inappropriate, because that would just be nasty, right? And so it really helps to keep that purity of relationship when we view each other as brother and sister in dating until we approach marriage. When intentions are unclear, what happens is that it creates a premature form of intimacy that can ultimately lead to hurt and confusion in the long run. And we don't want that.